Hello everyone, welcome to the Eternal Card Breakdown. We're going to be starting up a review of the full set of Eternal Revelations, the new set. It's pretty delightful. We've been really enjoying it. There's a lot of interesting, fun stuff to be doing at the moment, and there's a lot of fun cards to be playing with. So we're going to start our review with a list of the legendaries, basically what's a good craft, what's interesting to play, like what kind of decks they belong into. We usually talk about things in terms of like whether or not they'll be good in like Expedition or Throne or Draft, but in this case, most of the time you're not going to be seeing these legendaries in Draft, and when you do, you might be pretty happy to see them depending. Legendaries tend to be build around me cards. They're very complicated. They often require a lot of support, often from like a fairly tuned deck to get to the places where they are going. Sometimes they are flashy, like, big sell cards that have just a lot of stats and a lot of like interesting things going on and can sort of carry games on their own, but more often than not they're something where you need a certain amount of support to actually build the deck around them. And so we're going to be talking about like what kind of decks those are and also what kind of legendaries these are. We also have an eye for design and for storytelling and lore, so we're always interested in seeing a little bit more of that. We'll be talking about like the design of these cards as well as like some of the like things that are going on in Eternal sets in terms of like certain story choices, such as, for example, all of the gunslingers in this format not being gunslingers. Now, this is Callous Triggerman. He's a quick draw stealth 4/3 with ultimate at the start of your turn. Reveal Callous Triggerman to play Gun Down or Armed and Dangerous. Gun Down being a 5-cost, deal 5 damage to any unit without quick draw, and Armed and Dangerous being a 6-cost, put 2 3/3 weapons on 2 different units, or 1 3/3 weapon on 2 different units, I guess would be the way you say that. I'm not sure of the exact wording. I can just look at the card. Play a +3/+3 weapon on 2 of your units. So yeah, it is a 4/3 quick draw stealth, so it's okay in terms of like aggressive sort of options in stealth. The main thing about like quick draw and stealth going together is that they tend to work really well if you're attacking with the quick draw unit before it's revealed, but because of the way that Callous Triggerman is played, unless the card gets charged, which it's not going to do, while in your hand, you're basically never going to be able to take advantage of the quick draw in stealth. It's just going to be a card that's mostly unblockable when it's played. At the start of your turn, it can either kill one unit that is being a problem for you, which is card for card value, and basically means that you have played an understated unit with a pretty useful quick draw ability, and then killed one of your opponent's like more problematic cards, but you have to wait the turn and make sure that your opponent doesn't target the card with stealth to get that benefit. If your opponent just throws a torch at the stealth unit, which it's fairly hard to do that to a 5-cost unit, but sometimes people do, then they reap all of the advantages. You don't get the extra bonuses, and you trade card for card, but you go down in tempo quite a bit. So there's a lot of risk to playing this card, but revealing it is usually going to be pretty good upside. So you get a pretty good removal card, or more likely you actually play Armed and Dangerous, which the more expensive card, not always the best card, but definitely a card that gives you a really aggressive start, where you basically have now a 7/6 quick draw, and probably one other card that's going to be very dangerous as well, maybe a red Valkyrie flyer, maybe some sort of shadow card with quick draw or unblockable. There's all sorts of different cards that are going to benefit from Armed and Dangerous, and that 3/3 stat line is actually like really good at providing both survivability and enough of a clock to make any unit dangerous enough to be a must remove card. Like, if a 1/1 goes up to a 4/4, that card is now a problem. You actually have to deal with that. So Callous Triggerman, if he pops out of stealth, does reveal and basically really influence the board in a way that you really want him to do. I think that's a reasonably powerful thing. Obviously, the thing here is that he is pretty risky. There aren't that many 5-drop stealth cards. People have a chance of knowing what it is if your deck is meta, and if they do know what it is, they can deal with it pretty handily because it's going to have pretty low health, fairly high attack, and just kind of be like in that not so sweet spot where it's easily removable. 4/3 is one of the worst stat lines overall. Typically for Throne, it's always been the case because it's vulnerable to Vanquish and vulnerable to Torch. Torch being no longer fast, it's not quite as common that 3 health units get dinged quite so much, but this is still a 5-cost card, so once people know what it is, it can be dealt with pretty tempo efficiently. But it's more likely than not to reveal, because like those stealth effects are going to be like pretty critical. So yeah, if stealth is not being handled in the format, this is a pretty good legendary, and it's also just like a kind of a strong legendary for people who are starting out and want to basically build decks that slowly build up power in the way that I would call them like the starter deck, where basically it's a sort of like cheap, simple deck that you're building that just plays like 1-drop into 2-drop into 3-drop. It's like a tempo deck, and you just sort of play cards and get out good stuff every turn and spend all of your power on good stuff. And Callous Triggerman is the kind of card that supports that really well. And those are really, really good decks for people who are climbing like bronze and silver and just want to like basically be aggressive and also be like somewhat mid-range minded, because they want to play more cards than just being like a super fast aggro deck, since super fast aggro often requires like a really, really tuned setup. If you're just playing the cards that you have, Callous Triggerman is usually a great card on top of that. That's the place that I'd most likely craft him. There are a couple of other pretty interesting options, so yeah, it's definitely pretty worth it. Yeah, in Stone Scar, the guy is a very funny one, paired with the Slug, which is a card that specifically says if you target the card with a spell, then you turn the spell around and do damage. So like that kind of Stone Scar setup is a really, really fun setup, to be sure. I think the card's reasonably strong. I don't think it's like gonna be the defining card of the set by any means, but I do think that there are some mid-range aggro strategies in Stone Scar in particular that are gonna be pretty happy to play him. So overall, yeah, that card's like a B- would be sort of where I'd put it. It's definitely playable. It's not going to occupy a lot of decks, but in the decks where it does occupy, it's going to shine. Hellfire Valkyrie. 4/4. When it attacks, deal 3 damage to the enemy, or draw a card and reduce its cost by 3 this turn. At the end of your turn, discard it. The only thing that I want from this card is the ability to do both, but that's okay. Hellfire Valkyrie is a card that definitely does a couple of things, right? So it is reasonably static for a 5-cost. 4/4 flying is pretty up there. It's not the most ridiculous option, but it definitely gets you some decent benefits, and it kills small stuff on the ground, which is most flyers have to have some setup where basically they have good defenders on the ground to keep them chaining their damage in. Because like the way flyers work is that they provide you a lot of tempo if you aren't getting tempo down on the ground. So you often need like a high health unit or something in order to make sure that like your opponent's stuff isn't coming across on the ground when you're coming across in the air. Hellfire Valkyrie solves that problem by basically just dealing with the aggro cards itself. If it's attacking, it can ping aggro cards as much as it likes, and if your opponent does not have any aggro cards, then you can choose instead to pick up cards of your own, make them super cheap, and play them, which can be really, really beneficial for getting out big dragons and huge relics and any number of other like fairly scary things. So yeah, this card has a lot of like sort of straight value. Once again, it's another card along the lines of Callous Triggerman, where it would just fit really well in like a tempo style deck. You just get a lot of good benefits from it, and it plays pretty well in Valkyries overall. Green-red Valkyries has always been a popular deck in the Eternal meta in Throne, and I think that this is something that fits okay in that slot due to there not being that many 5-cost Valkyries around that area. You can get a couple of things going on there. The main place that power slot is occupied by right now is basically just playing Ikaria 2 and powering it up into a 4/3. So this is a pretty reasonable tempo play over that can actually push a lot of damage and also get you an Ikaria for 4 or something exciting like that. Doesn't synergize too well with that because you can't play the card with charge due to the fact that you've already attacked, but it's still a reasonable effect and also like a good value engine. I think this card's like super, super fun. This is like a solid, like this is like B+ area where it's just like it does everything right. It fits pretty well in most decks. It's a pretty powerful option and it just has no weak points. It's just really, really simple and easy and to use, and everything it does is always going to be happy for you because it gives you a lot of modular choices. It's not like ridiculously overpowered by any means. I think the stat line is fine and everything else is good, but there's a reason that this is a set seller. Like this thing is super, like it's a gorgeous piece of art. It's a wonderful looking card that actually like fits a popular archetype in Throne, and it is very, very good at doing all of the jobs that it wants to do at 5. So I think this card's like super, super good. It's just not a card that is like break the meta good. Doomsday Assembly. Like this card a lot. Your units deal double damage. When one of your units deal damage, you get +1 power this turn. Amplify 1, play a 1/1 ticking grenadin. This appeals to all sorts of things in me. It is a huge greed card. It is a big red payoff that doesn't kill your opponent instantly. Most of the big red payoffs are just like, yeah, I flame blast you, and you were already at 20 or something like that, and it's like, or you were already at 15. With Doomsday Assembly, even if your opponent is at like 25, then you've got some extra push to get yourself through a game. All of your units dealing double damage is a huge effect in red in particular, because it just gives you a lot of direct damage. The extra power is really, really good for playing into your larger stuff. And the amplify, of course, if you are paying it at 8 or 9, is just like 12 straight damage. If you're paying it at 14, it's enough damage to kill your opponent unless they have a mass silence. The ticking grenadins are just super scary and will probably find a way to kill your opponent. Not necessarily definitely, but probably. I'm a big fan of probably kills your opponent. Design-wise, this card is awesome. It fills a slot that red doesn't really have, which is, again, like that huge sort of big payoff where you get a really big relic and do something like ridiculous with it. I think that I've been looking for a card like this for a long time, because there's so many interesting like red ramp decks, and the payoffs for them are all just like very conditional. Doomsday Assembly is not conditional. When it comes out, it does the thing it wants to do, and maybe that thing isn't good enough, but that thing is usually at least a sincere board advantage bonus. This is like a C+ in power. It's okay. It doesn't really like... it's way too expensive. It's a relic. Like those two things are just like, basically there are very, very few relics where you play them and you're just like, hooray, now I instantly win. Like Marge's Chains is one of the only ones that like really, really feels hard to come out from under. And this one being like a little bit cheaper than Marge's Chains is pretty interesting, but like it represents, and it doesn't represent really a lot of tempo loss because it is doubling down all of your units. But if you're getting all your stuff removed, as is fairly common for red decks, and you play a Doomsday Assembly at 7, not much really changes on the board. So there's a lot of potential places where this goes wrong, and playing it out again doesn't necessarily win you the game. So yeah, you got to build a really, really specific deck for it. It's strong against most deck archetypes when you do that, but once you played it out, maybe it's not going to do as much for you at that point. Like it's always possible that you're going to get counted out by the meta, or that there's going to be an easy removal choice for it, and the taking grenadin aren't going to be too easy. I think in particular, like attachment destruction should be really, really popular. Furnace Mage is currently in the meta, and I recommend that you use Furnace Mage right now, because there are a lot of cards that just straight generate artifacts or relics for free. And one of them is a power card. So yeah, people are going to be running Furnace Mage and like Ruin and a bunch of other stuff like that. So this is a little bit on the weak side, but super, super fun design and really, really good art. I love the like, it kind of looks like a chariot being pulled by Grenadogs, but now that I look at it a little bit more, it might be more just a bunch of congregating grenadin. Either way, they look menacing as heck and also cute as heck in, two different places. So good stuff. Pivotal moment. This is probably picturing an actual pivotal moment in the Eternal story, right? I don't know what that is, but there's an Oni, and it's doing something against something blue. Looks like it's deflecting piece of magic? Not sure. Anyways, when all our units hits the enemy player this turn, draw a card. It's free this turn. Discard at the end of your turn. So, yeah, this card's really, really fun design. If you hit the enemy player, you get a bunch of free cards with a bunch of stuff. So attack them with a bunch of Ticking Grenadin or a bunch of Berserk units, and assuming you don't kill them that turn, which you're probably not doing because Pivotal Moment isn't giving you any sort of board state advantage, then you get a bunch of cards, and those are free, and they get to do a lot of other stuff. I wish this card allowed you to play power for free, or you can play as much power as you like this turn. Just because drawing 5 power in a card and getting to play 1 free card is not so amazing, and Pivotal Moment just kind of feels like it needs some extra piece of oomph to really be the card that's like most worth it. This is a fun design for sure, and it's a really, really fun big card, but there's a lot of things that have to be set up ahead of time for this 7-drop to get you an advantage in card and board state, and even then it will not guarantee that you win the game, because if you're attacking with a deck that doesn't kill your opponent but somehow has like a bunch of like small units that deal damage, and you Pivotal Moment, and you get a bunch more of those cards that don't deal enough damage to kill your opponent, you know, like that's not really helping you either. So you got to have like this sort of mix of cheap effective units that can deal damage, like, you know, maybe when you have like 2 things that are attacking type setup, and then you also have to get the other benefit on top of that. So this is like really, really specific. In that sort of vein, it's like, you know, it's not amazing power. I would say it's like D+, something like that. It obviously can do a thing, and that thing is really, really cool. But it's very hard to set up, requires a very specific deck, and can be countered very easily. Typically just by doing the things that you want to do in Eternal, which is blocking cards and removing cards that you can't block. So, by and large, not an amazingly powerful option, but oh boy, you can do some, I mean, fun free cards are always great, and if you're ramping into this and somehow doing it in the middle of an aggro turn, yeah, it's a satisfying turn. I'd say this card is super fun. I definitely crafted 4 copies of it immediately. I love it. I don't think it's super powerful. But yeah, super cool. All right, we're into the time cards. Kanye Ironthorn Envoy is up first. Summon when one of your units hits the enemy player this turn. Play a random sigil from your deck. Pay 10 to give your units +3/+3 this turn. That is a permanent effect that Kanye Ironthorn Envoy can repeat. So this is an interesting one. House Ironthorn is probably confirmed confirmed as Combre at this point, so we know that for sure. I think that was always kind of obvious because they had the like double guns, but I wasn't 100% certain at the time. So yeah, neat to see one of the houses like sort of being confirmed by new cards in that particular house. Yeah, the summon ability is one that doesn't trigger as often as you would like, but it's still a 4-cost 4/4. It's still a soldier, which is a pretty relevant stat line, and it still has an ability that allows you to push through and end the game. That ability costs too much, and you're not going to be able to play it very often, so that's a little bit of a bummer. And I think there's a lot of games where Kanye Ironthorn Envoy neither gets her sigil or pays 10 for her abilities because she's just a tempo-efficient unit, and you want to play her on 4 the turn that she's available. And when that happens, you just might not be dealing damage that turn, or dealing enough damage that turn. And you certainly aren't going to force it through just to get a random ramp card. It can get you to 6, though, if you do it right. So overall, I think this card is actually still pretty strong. Like, you know, definitely like C+, B-, like it's usable in soldiers. It's not guaranteed to be in every soldier deck, and it nonetheless like actually does do like, you know, it does its job. It's certainly not an incredibly exciting option, but because like basically you have to have another unit out to get that sigil, and when you get that sigil, like you are very, very happy, because then you can just jump into your 6-drops and do like a lot of other crazy stuff, which does allow you to sort of transition into that mid-range setup. So once again, another one of those cards that like if you have it, you don't want to like disenchant it, especially if you're trying to build a collection, because this is the type of card that really like synergizes very well with all of that aggression. It does combo with a lot of different like options that like actually allow you to deal other damage. Oh, I didn't realize actually when I was looking at it that works for every unit that hits the enemy player this turn. When one of your units hits the enemy player this turn, play a random sigil from your deck. So yeah, if you're using like an auto tread, I think it might trigger for every unit that hits them, in which case that is actually significantly better. Because then you can just like play really go wide token strategies and ramp them into crazy nonsense. Yeah, no, that's a higher power card. I'd say this is more like a B+. That would definitely change my ranking of it by quite a bit. Because if each unit that hits triggers that summon, which I was not aware of, I've seen the card played and I've just blocked the unit every time or taken 1 point and let them play a sigil. But I hadn't realized how good that was. Yeah, no, there's some interesting stuff here. So like, yeah, auto tread allows you to play multiple sigils. You can do stuff with the attack with 2 or more card that allows you to deal damage for each attacking 2 or more cards. So if you're playing like Praxis soldiers, then you play that 2/3 and then you attack with 2 units, and both units deal 1 damage to the enemy player, triggering 2 sigils, and then they hit the enemy player, triggering 2 more. So like, yeah, there's some crazy ramp stuff going on there, and if you're actually like clearing the board and making sure that you're attacking with that early damage, this is a card that transitions you into very, very big sentinels later, and also has its own payoff at the top. Every time I've looked at this card, I was like, there's something that doesn't quite fit here. That was the thing that I was missing. Yeah, I still think that it is a card where you sometimes don't get either effect, but when you don't get either effect, it's still a 4/4. Really, really well statted, does a lot of good things. Lovely, lovely option. Last Carnosaur. 6/5 stealth. Start of your turn, reveal the last Carnosaur to give your units killer. What a fun card, what a fun design. Have I talked about this card yet? Because I love it. I love everything about it. So this is the only dinosaur in the Bastion Rising cycle. It is the only Carnosaur. All of the dinosaurs are already extinct, and this one is just hiding in the Shadow Sea, waiting to jump out and give everything killer and eat you. It's gonna be good. I think it's a face devourer, and it's pretty delightful overall. 6/5 with killer is super cool. This is a huge unit that actually like has a lot of health for a stealth unit, and has a decent amount of attack for a stealth unit, and it is just like, it's as well statted as Predatory Carnosaur. Predatory Carnosaur is a 6-cost 5/6 now, but as a 6-cost 6/6, it was completely ridiculous. The last Carnosaur is a 6/5 for 5, so you can frequently have it be a basically like more damaging killer unit the same turn that the Predatory Carnosaur used to come out. Oh wait, is Predatory Carnosaur 7-cost 7/7 now? I think that card gets changed around a lot. Yeah, this has potential to be actually pretty nuts. Obviously, revealing it means that you don't get killer and you just have a 6/5, but that is still Terrazon stats, and Towering Terrazon was always just like a fine card to play in terms of overall stuff. This is not a bad card by any means. Where would I put this on the power scale? I think it's like a solid B. It doesn't add a huge amount to your deck, but it is just always a good creature to have. So you're pretty likely to play it. It's cheap, it's easy, it fits in that slot, and it's gonna be pretty ridiculous if it reveals itself, and if it doesn't reveal itself or it gets revealed by something, you got a decent unit out of it. You're not gonna lose the game because of that. So yeah, I think that is pretty like B tier. It's wonderful. It doesn't like completely wreck faces or anything, but it definitely does some awesome stuff, and you want to slot it in your deck if you're playing just, from a basic set of cards. Supply line. When you play a unit, it gets +1/+1, then increase this ability by 1. This is like the equivalent of like a Xenon Obelisk, where the card just wins you the game over time. It is not the equivalent of a Xenon Obelisk in terms of overall tempo. It's a really expensive relic with a very slow to operate ability. However, the faster that you get it running, the better off you are. I think this would trigger simultaneously. If you trigger like 12 units, what will happen is you'll get +1/+1 on each of them, and then increase the ability by 12. I could be wrong about that, but it should trigger for basically any unit that you play. I don't believe it would go off in ordered options because of the way there's no stack in Eternal, or rather there is a stack in Eternal, but it includes simultaneous abilities. So supply lines could do some interesting things in that sort of vein, where you play this and you play Send for the reserves, and then you start getting really, really big units. This is obviously a great way to win an end game. It obviously just has no strength at all in any sort of like early game strategy. So if you are playing that like Kanye deck and you're playing it all out for Send for the Reserves, or for Rat Cage, or for any number of like artifact based or unit based strategies where you're just doing like a lot of stuff and playing a ton of small units, this is a card that will just absolutely destroy. But I think Xenon Obelisk is better 95% of the time, and in those situations, you know, that basically gets it a D. It's a great card for the end game, but it's only good for that, and you still kind of need to have a specific deck to really play it. Still, that card does some fun stuff. Valiant Guardian. Endurance, Overwhelm, and Valor. Enemy spells cost 4 more. When it hits the enemy player, play the top 2 cards of your deck. 8/8, 4 time. The 4 time, I think, puts it outside of the range of a lot of different decks due to the fact that it's just fairly hard to play 4 time. Even at 8, like, at 8, I would say 4 time is, like, pretty doable, but you're still playing 2 color, not 3 color decks. So that removes some of its strength, but also this card does a lot of fun things. So definitely pushing the limits of like what a card can do without like having an immediate onboard effect. Valiant Guardian makes enemy spells cost more, which doesn't necessarily prevent them from playing removal cards on it and trading you 1 for 1. They can always Death Strike you for 8. That is not like gonna stop them from doing some of the things that they want to do. It will stop them from channeling the Tempest or using a brilliant idea or anything where they have like a really, really big expensive spell that they want to play. And it will stop them from killing your stuff with Send to Market or like Cut the Line or anything along those lines. If you ramp the card out, it will cold stop removal, which is wonderful. And if it swings, then it's gonna deal damage because it's got Overwhelm. And it's gonna play the top 2 cards of your deck, which is amazing. Yeah, this card's like, I'd say like a C+. It is... There are probably things you're going to want to play at 8 that are a little more immediately impactful than this. But you're not going to be unhappy for playing this because it's just not a card that gets stopped easily or doesn't disrupt your opponent's turn for at least the next turn. So this card will always just get you through turn 8. Your opponent will have to spend the next turn either like paying a massive amount of power to like get rid of the card or setting up a blocking situation that might not work for them. And like basically this will change your opponent's plans when you play it. And I think that is usually good enough at 8 to be worth playing considering the massive upside if this card actually maintains and stays on board for long enough. But yeah, it is a real expensive card with a heavy influence cost that also is like just tricky to use. I don't think I mentioned the Valor on it, but like, yeah, this card is also hard to block. You can't really trade with it. You can't really cast spells at it. It's just sticky and annoying, and that's not necessarily what you're looking for out of an 8-drop, but like, it does do a good job at what it's trying to do. So yeah, I'd say this is definitely like a CC+. So super cool card. Endless Steps. Your most recently played unit has strength and health equal to Endless Steps loyalty. Health. Terra's agenda, endure, 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 endure. Terra herself is a 3-cost 3/3 summon. Give one of your other units Warcry 2. When an enemy kills that unit, double Terra's strength and health, and she gets Warcry 4. Which, that's a lot of text. We can show Terra real quick. Just, I don't think she'll show up because I'm not looking at the cards. Okay, yeah. Well, let's not get rid of our... Yeah. In any case, yeah, this card is interesting. The passive effect on it is the strongest part about it. Like having bigger units that are attacking invulnerable to damage every turn is pretty nuts, especially if they are like endurance units that are able to block as well and defend your Endless Steps. It has fairly low health for a site. It has a really, really long agenda, which takes a long time to get set up and does not do anything helpful for you if you don't have units on board that can attack every turn. It also, like, you can't target other people's units with it. It's just not flexible at all. But it provides you with a decent amount of like extra value. We've played the Huru version of this deck already. If you haven't seen it, it's up on Eternal Brews. I believe we called that one like Bears with Jetpacks or something like that. And it was delightful. Yeah, so this is definitely like a really, really fun card that actually does like a decent amount of work. It's a little specific, but it's a site, and I think the site is providing you with enough onboard benefit for 3 to be considered pretty powerful. B-. probably. Like, I think it plays in most decks. It's not amazing in most decks, and in the decks it is amazing in, it's real good. So yeah, no, strong stuff. Kind of an interesting design. I would give it like higher grades for design if it was actually rule of threes on endure. I just don't understand why it's endure. That's a weird way to introduce 4 agenda sites, because like endure just sounds so satisfying, and endure kind of sounds like a little bit much. This card feels exhausting, which I guess is the idea. It's endless steps. In any case, it's an okay design, but like, I don't give it points for its like cheekiness, because the rule of threes kind of like disrupts that cheekiness a little bit. I don't know. This is very specific Pojo problems. Anyways, experimental force field. Enemy units without flying can't attack you. You have -1 maximum power for each enemy unit without flying. This card doesn't really need to exist, but okay. It's a fog lock type thing. If it ever becomes too powerful, they'll have to nerf it, and it'll be worse than it is. It's already pretty bad, and it is a card that stalls the game and forces your opponent to like deal with you with spells. Yeah, or flying units. I don't know. There's nothing I really love about the design apart from the fact that it has 1 health, which I think a 0/1 relic weapon for 4 is just, there's something delightfully risky about that. It kind of makes me want to play it, where it's just like, oh man, this strategy will so fall apart if my opponent has that 1 cost deal 1 damage thing. That's real fun. But like, yeah, figuring out how to defend the experimental force field sounds like a lot of work to me. Even for like a fairly like Jenny focused player, where I'm just really into combos and stuff like that. And like the end result of a functioning version of that deck is a deck where I can lock my opponents out of the game and everybody will be unhappy and miserable. This is not a powerful card. It's like a D-. Find the right combination of cards, and it's the most annoying deck in the world and can potentially be just broken in half. But I don't think that the support is there yet. And also, don't. Oh. Great Blade. While the wielder has more health than a player, it has double damage endurance and is invulnerable to damage. Amplify 3, play challenge by law. I loved this card when I thought it was if you have more health than the enemy player. But it is when the wielder has more health than any player. And it does nonetheless really appeal to a lot of different things in me, including the big Timmy stuff. Like, this is a card that makes you your very, very, very big unit into a really, really, really horrible unit. Double damage, giant nightmare with endurance and invulnerable to damage that just killed a bunch of your opponent's stuff and silenced everything else so that it can't deal with it. That's a lot of fun. That is a great Timmy Tammy card. You can just do all sorts of things with big giants in this type of setup. We've put it on bears. It's been super satisfying there. It's usually like a 2-of in those decks because it just doesn't do quite enough on its own and frequently doesn't activate. But when it doesn't activate, it's a 3/3 weapon, which is, I mean, even at 5, a 3/3 weapon is okay. Like, there is a colorless 3/3 weapon at 5, and like, you'll take that into a limited game. And if you'll take it into a limited game, it's possible that it's going to be okay enough in Expedition, even if you don't get like any other benefit off of it. I don't think that that's often true, but like when you're threatening to do much more with it, that is a decent stat baseline because it just protects a unit from enough damage to make it so that your opponent typically has to spend 1 more card to get rid of it. And so you're trading card for card with it most of the time. But, like, you know, it also can be something you put on a unit and then your opponent just has a hard removal like Topple, and, well, that's gone. In any case, the Amplify, I think, nonetheless makes up for that. Like, even if you don't get to the point where the unit is so big that your opponent that it has all of those other cool stats. The ability to play removal at 8 on a unit is just really, really nice. Challenge by Law is pretty powerful, and playing that at 8 I think is solid. This is like a B- card again. You get a decent amount of cool stuff out of it. It actually is pretty stat efficient, and using it as a removal card at 8 in like a heavy ramp deck is gonna be pretty likely to do something horrible to your opponent. Challenge by Law is a card that you're pretty happy to get for free off of this 3/3 weapon. Free? I don't know. Yeah, it's a card that you're not gonna be happy to play while also buffing something on your own board. Kai Awaken Master. 3/6, Stealth, 5-drop. Summon each unit in your hand gets a random battle skill. Ultimate, when you play another unit, reveal Kai to play Kai's Blessing. Yeah, so this is pretty impressive stuff. Kai has some neat things going on. One, it's I think the only stealth card with 6 health. Oh wait, no, there is a 0/6 as well. But it's one of the only like expedition playable stealth cards with 6 health. Yeah, I guess you could just play like double troll deck and play the wall and the Kai and just like expect people to throw damage at it. That'd be kind of fun. In any case, Kai's Blessing says that one of your units becomes awakened and you give its battle skills to each unit in your deck, which means that as an ultimate, that tends to be pretty ridiculous for buffing up your entire deck Crown of Possibilities style. In a Crown of Possibilities green deck, you can do some pretty fun stuff with this. It's a really cool design for that kind of like shenaniganry. It's also really well statted to receive lots of random skills. Like it's just got a good amount of damage and a really good amount of health for having double damage and berserk and all of the other things that you want to have. So yeah, it's the kind of card where if it's buffing itself, you're pretty happy with it. Most of the time it's going to get something that's pretty beneficial because it's got too many cool stats to not get something beneficial. Very survivable, very sticky for a 5-drop. 3/6 is a pretty rare stat line and just usually survives the majority of cards under 4. It doesn't get vanquished. It's very hard to kill with most forms of removal, including Gun Down, which is a card that procs off of a bunch of other different cards. It can be obliterated or dealt with the 6-drop that deals 6 damage, but like overall this is a card that just is likely to be sticking around on the board, and the summon ability in it gives you a decent small benefit, probably just buffs like 1 unit in your hand, and then the ultimate ability also gives you a decent small benefit, probably just makes the rest of your deck a little bit better for the rest of the game. I think it's honestly like a D+ in power level. I would be surprised if this card is like meta defining in any way, and most of the decks that you build it in are just super fun. And they do a lot of cool things, and they get really good random rolls, and the random rolls are often going to win you games, but at the same time, they're also often not going to do very much for your deck strategy. I could be wrong about this card, but like I think that it's just I might upgrade that to like a C-. I think the card like stands pretty well on its own, and that's a big benefit to it. But like it's so hard to get your hand full of useful units. It's so hard to draw the units once you've actually done all of the other things that Kai wants you to do. And by the time that all of that matters, the game might already be over. But it also holds its own, stalls the game out pretty well to help out with doing all these things, and has stealth, which I think is a pretty big benefit for setting up a strategy like this. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting card. Power level remains to be a little bit determined, but I don't think it's terribly strong on its own. I just think it's fun and wonderful design. Really, really solid. A+ on that. Okay, so we're into the blue cards. We're going to take a short break here because this has already run for like 40 minutes. And we will come back for a second video. See you in a moment. Cheers.